Hello. I am back. Hopefully the sound is working this time. I'm going to check and make sure that is working. All right, it is working. Alrighty. All right, I'm gonna try this again. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and try this again. If you're in the studio, please give me a thumbs up. I'm back. Alrighty. Part 2. I didn't think I would be back this soon. So once again, welcome back to Under the Hood. I apologize for not having sound in the last video. Today we're going to talk about what I wish I had known before I became a faculty member. So I'm going to try this one more time. As a caveat, I will not be discussing Title IX issues on this channel. Also, any views that I express on this channel reflect that of my thoughts and not my current or past institutions. So thank you all for being here again. All right, so let's jump into the topic that I wanted to talk about at the beginning of 2023. I think it's very fitting. I can see that a lot of people are watching videos from the faculty position series in preparation, it seems, for upcoming interviews. And so I just want to make a plug for the affirmation video. So be sure to check that out. Listen to that. It's a 5-minute video. You can repeat it to get you ready for your interviews. And these are things that I've told myself ahead of interviews that put me in a positive headspace in order to secure these faculty positions. All right. And so this video is in response to a request I got to talk about what I wish I had known. Okay. Number 1, decision fatigue. All right. So number 1, as a faculty member, I experience quite a bit of decision fatigue, meaning I make so many small decisions day in and day out for my personal care and my professional obligations that by the end of the week, I can barely choose what I want to eat. Okay. So decision fatigue happens to a lot of people because you spend a lot of cognitive energy making decisions on behalf of your group, especially if you are an R1 STEM researcher. And so for those of you that don't know, R1 is the Carnegie classification for research productivity of an institution. And so there are benchmarks for R1 versus R2. R1 institutions usually have high research expenditures and they produce a high number of PhD graduates. All right. So what I wish I had known is that I would experience decision fatigue all the time. Number 2, and these are in no particular order. Number 2, I wish I had known that I would be doing everything in my group unless I paid for additional help in the form of an administrative assistant or outsource that to a willing student. Essentially, as a faculty member, we are responsible for financials. We're responsible for facilities, meaning communication with the administrative assistants at the department, college level that handle those things for us. We're the go-between between our students and admissions or graduate advising. We sign their paperwork. So we are HR people. We're mentors. We are teachers. We are researchers. We raise money. So we are development. we're fundraising development. We are marketers. We manage our own websites or outsource it, and we are social media managers as well. So I'll talk about it a little bit later, but transferable skills that are picked up along the way as a result of doing everything are actually quite beneficial. All right. Number three, what I wish I had known. And it is to ask upfront for anything that I may need as a new faculty member. So, as a caveat, you shouldn't really think about asking for anything until you've received a verbal offer from an institution. Okay. So a verbal offer is oftentimes informal. All right. It is not the final offer. It's just the hiring department letting you know that they have intentions to hire you if the negotiations go well. So it is at this stage, after you've received a verbal offer or an informal offer, that you begin to ask for what you need as a new professor. And so it's at this stage where you need to work with a trusted advisor to ask about um, what you think will be your needs, but in the next 1 to 5 years. So really projecting out where you see your lab in 5 years. If that means you're expanding from in silico to field research, anticipate for that and ask for the resources and equipment that you need to do that. So ask for everything up front, get creative, get imaginative. Don't pigeonhole yourself at this stage so that you ask for exactly what you need. Number four, physical space is important. So I started out as a majority in silico researcher, meaning most of my work was with modeling. It was done on the computer. So I assumed that I would need as much space as, say, someone with a wet lab. However, it is very important to have your own designated physical space, regardless of the research methods that you use. Your students need somewhere to go and sit and be able to talk in private, think in private, and have space where they can concentrate. So, usually, if there is a cube farm set up, students can go to their own lab space and think. But if you're an in silico researcher in a cube space, you may want to ask for um, like a designated meeting room or time in a meeting room that you can use specifically for your students, um, because it's important to establish your identity around this physical space. Number five, what I wish I had known, and this relates back to number four, and that is space is always limited. Okay. So, regardless of the institution that you belong to, I can just based on my experience across about 4 or 5 institutions, space was always limited. It is the most valuable resource on a campus. So that's why it's important to get your space requests in writing at the offer stage, because it's oftentimes very difficult to maneuver acquiring new space after you've signed your offer because space is limited. And so just a word of advice for people that may be receiving offers in the next couple of months from different departments. Make sure that you get the room number of your designated space for your students and your lab written into your offer letter. Number 6, I wish I had known about something called teaching culture. So, teaching culture is the level of seriousness that the department has for teaching responsibilities. So, some things that you can ask about teaching culture include do junior faculty members teach the hardest classes? Number one. Number two, are junior faculty allowed to develop new courses to add to the curriculum? Um, is there flexibility to do that? Number three, are course buyouts acceptable practice in your department? So in some places, it's not commonplace. It's not a part of the teaching culture to buy out of a course because the department wants to make sure that certain courses are offered often enough to service the students that are in the department. So that's also a part of teaching culture. The other thing you may want to ask about is whether or not teaching performance weighs very heavily in your merit and promotion reviews. So at a research institution, obviously teaching is not the priority, but you want to make sure that poor performance in teaching is not weighed really negatively heavily. So I know of one instance where a really poor teaching review in a professor's like first offering of the course resulted in that teacher having to go into some sort of remediation to improve upon those reviews. They had to demonstrate that they were working on improving their teaching skills. Okay, so it's really important to know about how departments feel about teaching, because the culture is very different from institution to institution, from college to college, and from department to department. Number 7, what I wish I had known. I wish I had a better understanding of how to gauge how much work faculty would have to do to maintain the programs in the department. So, what I mean by this, in my mind, a large department has about 30 or more faculty members. That is a large department, in my opinion. A small department is about 10 or fewer, and then a medium-sized department is about 20 faculty members. So the way you can gauge whether or not it's going to be a lot of work in that department is if the student to faculty ratio is really high. So if there are 30 or more students per faculty, the likelihood of having to take on more service work, more advising, more teaching is high. As an example, the department that I was hired into, as when I started out, offered 2 degrees, but the department was medium sized, almost small. Therefore, a lot of work got distributed across the faculty members. So if you are interviewing in a department that has about 40 or 50 faculty members and there's only one undergraduate degree, a few electives, you can probably engage you probably won't have a ton of service and a ton of teaching. Also, if you work in a department that teaches a core course that all of the STEM students have to teach or have to take, such as general chemistry, general physics, intro to biology, like the likelihood of having TA support is very high. Since all of those students have to go through that department, the department gets a lot of revenue from the institution. Therefore, there's a lot of teaching support in the form of TAs. Therefore, your teaching load may not be as stressful as a department like engineering. Number 8, what I wish I had known. I wish I had known pretty early on that I could do whatever research I wanted to do. Okay. So I actually learned this sometime in my first year, but I wish I had known before I started. Essentially, as long as the research you're proposing to do is ethical, meaning it meets institutional review board requirements, as long as you can get funding for that research, as long as the research is feasible, you can really do whatever you want. And I'm making this comment to encourage people that feel pigeonholed or feel siloed that you can expand the breadth of your research at your comfort level. I don't recommend burning through your startup account to chase ideas that aren't fundable, that aren't feasible, and that will not result in research outputs. It's some of the best advice I've ever received as a faculty member. And had I not taken that advice, I would not be where I am today. Number 9, what I wish I had known. I wish I had known that my intuition never lies. So as a faculty member and as someone who is highly intuitive, someone that believes in their gut, right? So for those of you that are highly intuitive and you have always relied on your gut instinct, I would say in terms of being an academic, your intuition will always serve you well. Now, I also recommend comparing your intuition and your intuitive guide to whatever cerebral information you're receiving from a trusted advisor. Weigh the evidence, but at the end of the day, trust that if early on you think it's a bad idea or you don't get a good feeling about something, likely it's not a good idea. And that covers collaborations, proposals that you think you want to apply for. Usually the proposals I feel really good about are the ones that get funded. Number 10, what I wish I had known. I wish I had known that there are pretty much acceptable benchmarks for success as an academic, particularly as someone who is trying to earn tenure at a university. There is a status quo. And if you ever want to know what that status quo is, all you have to do is look at the CVs of recently promoted faculty for a department. And what you begin to see is that there is a weight of evidence to point toward acceptable benchmarks for productivity. So that takes a little bit of the mystery out of what it takes to be successful as an academic. So I've always done this weight of evidence approach, even as a grad student. But even more so, it's important as a faculty member. But just as a piece of layered advice, I wouldn't settle for the weight of evidence average benchmarks. You should always shoot for above that to make sure you're in the clear, right? So number 11, I wish I had known how valuable the skills were that I would pick up along the way as an academic. Going back to number 2, I do everything, right? And so with this, what I wish I had known, I wish I had known that all the pain points for teaching, all the pain points for learning how to budget and learning how to think about financial transactions in an academic institution, those are really helpful skills that transfer across many sectors, including entrepreneurship. In particular, although it was a very horrendous period, so the period of time where we did quite a bit of online teaching during the height of the pandemic, I actually picked up quite a few skills in regard to delivering online education. So learning the tools for that, learning how to deliver lectures online, learning how to become a compelling online lecturer, learning how to host events online. Those are things that I picked up as a result of the grueling process of converting my in-person materials to online during the COVID pandemic. So I would say for those of you that are just getting started, or maybe you're 1 or 2 years in and it's very painful, the growth process as an academic, rest assured that in about 4 to 5 years, or maybe even sooner, you'll see how all of those skills you're building are actually helping you in a myriad of ways outside of academia. Number 12, what I wish I had known. I wish I had known way early on, about outsourcing graphic design. So outsourcing my graphic design needs. So I was a late bloomer and I learned about getting professional assistance with graphic design for proposal figures and things like that. I learned that as a faculty member. And in 2023, it's even more important than it was when I first got started. So you're going to want to invest in professional assistance for graphical design, for graphical abstracts, for papers. And this is how you get your paper on the cover of different journals. Also for proposals. So if you have a main figure that diagrams the flow of information for your proposal idea, you'll want to outsource that graphic. Or if you want to outsource nice graphics for your papers, that may also be um, uh, an avenue. I'd also recommend that for those of you that are building your labs and building your lab's brand, you can outsource the development of a logo. Okay. And I learned from a colleague of mine about the service called Fiverr. Okay. Fiverr is where you can actually get relatively cheaper graphic design if that service is not offered through your institution. Fiverr. And this is not an advertisement. All right. Number 13. What I wish I had known. I wish I had known very early on, even before I became a faculty member, is that it is totally within the bounds of an academic position to actually do outside consulting. All right. So there are rules about reporting the consulting activities to the university. However, many faculty members consult. And so, for those of you that know about how we're hired as professors, most of us are on 9 or 8 month contracts, meaning we are at liberty to raise the rest of our 12-month salary through external grants and even outside activities, as long as they are reported to the institution. And as long as they are within the rules for things like that. So a lot of faculty members that I know have spun out companies from the intellectual property that's developed as a result of their research as an academic. Then they turn that intellectual property into a business venture. All right, it then becomes a joint venture with the university, and sometimes they employ their former students to run those companies. Okay. Number 14, what I wish I had known. Okay, these last few are a little bit wacky. I wish I had known early on that the further along I got into my professoriate career, the more likely I was to lose relatability to the average person. So, professors, because of the nature of our work, because of the way in which we operate, most of us prioritize efficiency. And so we multitask. And so the way we communicate is a little bit different from the rest of the world. We're sometimes very blunt and not very emotional. And that's just the nature of the work. And it then becomes harder to relate to like the people that you used to know. And so for those of you that find it important to maintain relatability, obviously maintain the strength of your relationships outside of academia, because professors are they have their own type of communication that's wildly different from how average people communicate. Number 15, what I wish I had known. This one is really important. I wish I had known that when I first started out as a faculty member, that any insecurities that I had would be absolutely amplified as a faculty member. Okay. So if you can imagine, if you have insecurities about the way you speak, about the way you look, about anything in regard to your person, your skills, they get mirrored back to you in the form of teaching reviews, in the form of the way students interact with you in the classroom. And if you're sensitive, it could be a really hard process. So for those of us that are introspective and reflective, we take the feedback and we grow, we try to get better, but it can be difficult to get used to dealing with these insecurities head on in real time as new faculty members. Number 16, what I wish I had known. I wish I had known that essentially, based on advice I've been given and based on the weight of evidence that I've seen, the first 3 years of a faculty position are largely dedicated to scaling up your operation. Okay. So by scaling up, I mean you are building the foundation for research. You're both electronic and physical. You're buying equipment. You're buying supplies. You are building up your your mentees. You're helping them skill build. So, and they don't become independent until about 2 to 3 years into their program, you know. So for entrepreneurs that may uh, slide into academia, you understand this. But for those of us that have been strictly in academia our whole lives, the scale up portion of the faculty experience can be very grueling, and it takes a lot of energy to build a lab. But what I have seen is that after about 3 years, if you're at the same institution, you then begin to operate on autopilot. All right. Um, the learning curve becomes less steep around the end of year 3. And so, what makes the scale up period so difficult is that you're spending a lot of time learning new things. And when you're bombarded with new information, that's what generates the cognitive overload. Okay. And so, around year 3 is when you're not taking in as much new information, and therefore the scale up process becomes less draining. And so for someone like me who went through a pandemic for 3 years, and I moved institutions, my scale up was a little bit different. It took me about a year to really get into my groove at a new institution, after having spent about 2.5 years of scale up at another institution. All right, number 17. What I wish I had known well before I became a faculty member is good work speaks for itself. However, not if no one else knows about it. Okay? So, yes, good work speaks for itself, but it is critical that the research gets disseminated properly. Otherwise, no one's going to know about it. So, the way in which people can learn about your research is through the following ways. The traditional way: you have a well known mentor, and people are always interested in what they're doing. So, people are going to be interested in your work when they see your advisor's name on the paper. Number 2, you're a part of a pretty hot project, once again, that everyone's interested in. So people are going to be on the lookout for your papers. Number 3, disseminating your research at a technical meeting. So this is one of the most traditional ways in which you can get your name out there, where people begin to become more familiar with your work. Unfortunately, conferences are not accessible to everyone, so sometimes you will have to rely on word of mouth for your research. Last but not least, one of the more recent ways to disseminate research is through social media. So that's why social media has become such a wonderful tool for new early career researchers, for grad students who can put their work out there without having to pay for a conference, and without having to rely so much on the clout of their advisor. So once again, good work obviously speaks for itself, but not if no one knows about it. Last but not least, what I wish I had known as a faculty member, and this is not something that I would have known before I started because this is a new law, and that is moving costs are treated as imputed taxes. Okay? Moving costs are treated as imputed taxes. So I am not a tax advisor. I don't give tax advice. However, I would like to talk about moving, in case anybody's moving to California. Essentially, if your university offers to pay for your moving expenses when you're moving as a new faculty member, whatever the cost is associated with the moving contractor, that gets paid directly by the institution. However, they will list that as part of your taxable income. And so what that means is that before the end of the year, the taxes associated with that amount will be deducted from your paycheck. So it's like a phantom income. So the pay periods for which you have to pay those taxes, or where those taxes are withdrawn, your paycheck is lower. So that's an imputed tax. And this is a new law, so I would not have known this before I got started. That is all I have in regard to what I wish I had known before I became a faculty member. And I am more than happy to do part 2 in case there are some things that you want me to expand on, or things that I didn't get to. And once again, I just want to encourage people to look at the other resources on this channel. Look at the interview affirmations for those of you that have been using or looking at my faculty position resources. There have been a lot of views over there, particularly the screening interview. So before your screening interview, make sure to put my affirmation video on repeat. And so these are actually things that I told myself ahead of my interviews to get me in a really positive headspace. And with that, I wish everyone the best of luck that is on the job market. And thank you so much for being with me here on the first office hour of 2023. And with that, I will see you guys next time.